Suggested when a party loses, they reassess their positions. The Democratic Party didn't do that. The Democratic Party insisted for 4 years that Hillary won and the election was stolen, and it was Russia that stole it. And for 4 years, we heard that over and over and over.
You must not have been in the same electoral college room as me.
Madam Chairman, I'm speaking.
You voted for Okay.
The Democratic Party did not reassess any policies, but instead, the response to losing that election in 2016 was to introduce this bill to cause millions of illegal immigrants to be registered to vote for Democrats, to cause felons and criminals to be registered to vote for Democrats. And I would note that now in the 2020 election, there were a number of closely competitive Senate races, including in the state of Iowa, including the state of North Carolina, including in the state of Alaska, including in the state of Montana, that Democrats spent hundreds of millions of dollars trying to win, and they lost. And so what does this bill try to do? Change the electorates, and let's get a whole bunch of illegal voters to change the composition of the electorate, along with a partisan Federal Election Commission that will be counted on. The Chuck Schumer Election Commission, like clockwork, there will be an October surprise. Who are the vulnerable Republicans? Who are Republicans in close races? Boom. The Chuck Schumer Federal Election Commission will announce investigations and fines directed against them. This is a brazen power grab by the Democrats because you've decided democracy isn't worth it. You want to fix the game so the voters don't have control over our election.
Okay, so I have so much issues with what you just said because I'm thinking back to 2016 when, in fact, Hillary Clinton conceded the election, when, in fact, we had an electoral college. I know because Senator Blunt and I were in charge of it, and then Vice President Biden was presiding over it, and it went through. We didn't object to those results. Then let's fast forward to the day of the insurrection, to January 6th, when in fact you, Senator Cruze, not all of your colleagues here today, you were contesting the Electoral College. You were one of the leaders on the effort to say that the election results were not correct. And so you wonder why we want to make sure that people have the right to vote. Well, it's because of this kind of rhetoric and this kind of behavior and an insurrection at the Capitol and a former president that is still maintaining that he somehow won the election when we all know it's not true. And so that's why, if you ask why we are still interested in protecting our democracy from that day of January 6th on, I think that's your answer.
Well, Chairman Klobuchar, this bill had nothing to do with the 2020 election because it was drafted 4 years earlier. This bill has everything to do with Democrats trying to rig the election to stay in power and to disenfranchise voters. That's what this election is about. And by the way, Hillary Clinton insisted after the election she didn't lose. And not only that, Hillary Clinton advised Joe Biden, under no circumstances should you concede. So the ahistorical rewriting of what occurred is not accurate. And rigging the system to take away the rights of voters, this is designed to keep Democrats in power for 100 years. And it is fundamentally corrupt. And it is worth noting that when Republicans had a much bigger majority than Democrats have right now, Democrats have a 6-seat majority in the House and a 50-50 slimmest possible majority in the Senate, we made no effort to rig the system the way Democrats are doing, and that is dishonoring the promise we made to our constituents. Joe Biden and Kamala Harris have produced an absolute disaster on our southern border. The crisis that is unfolding is a humanitarian crisis, it is a public health crisis, and it is a national security crisis. Just over a month ago, I led a group of 19 senators to go to our southern border. Representing Texas, I've been to our southern border many, many times. In the Rio Grande Valley, this was by far the worst I've ever seen it. Masses crossing illegally, a caravan, one after the other, and all of this is man-made. We saw facilities that were packed at over 1,700% their capacity in the midst of a global pandemic, with a 10% COVID positivity rate. In the Donna tent facility, where kids were lined up in the Biden cages For 4 years, the press talked incessantly about kids in cages, and what was never reported is that Barack Obama built the cages, and Joe Biden is building more cages. They're bigger cages, and they're more full. In those Biden cages, we saw little boys and little girls, not 6 feet apart, as you would want during a pandemic, not 3 feet apart, not even 3 inches apart, lying on the floor, side by side, no beds, no mats, no cots, packed in as tight as they can be, wrapped in emergency reflective materials. Over 10% COVID positivity. The Biden administration barred the press from access. On our trip to the border, ABC News asked to embed with the 19 senators. Fox News asked to embed with the 19 senators. The Biden administration said no, and their reason was COVID. They said one cameraman from ABC was an unacceptable risk of COVID. Never mind 4,200 people crammed in a facility with 10% COVID positivity. One reporter, they said, was a COVID risk. We have a number of cameramen and women standing here. You know just how ludicrous that is. By the way, the Trump administration allowed the press in, the Obama administration allowed the press in, the Clinton administration did, the Bush administration did, but not Joe Biden. Joe Biden wants the world to cover up and hide this crisis that he has created. So the 19 senators, we pulled out our cell phones and we filmed and took pictures. The Biden administration sent a political minder from Washington, D.C., who jumped in front of the camera and screamed at senators, "Do not show these images to the American people." All of this is man-made. 3 decisions Joe Biden made. Halting construction of the wall on week 1 in office. Reinstating the failed policy of catch and release. And most indefensibly, ripping up the international agreement, Remain in Mexico, that had produced last year the legal immigration in 45 years. Remain in Mexico was an incredible success. So what did Joe Biden do? Ripped it up, and we have right now today the worst illegal immigration in 20 years. 178,000 people came in last month, the month of April. We're on a path to 2 million people, and it's getting worse. This month is worse than last month. Last month was worse than the month before. Every month it's getting worse because they're not fixing it. But as it's getting worse and worse, the corporate media has stopped covering it. You turn on the 6 o'clock news and suddenly the Biden border crisis has disappeared. Now, I recognize there are other crises. We've got a gas crisis playing out. We've got a war in the Middle East. We may have an inflation crisis coming. I agree. Biden policies are failing across the board, economically, domestically, and abroad. But that doesn't mitigate the disaster that's playing out on our southern border. In over 100 days in office, Joe Biden has not been to our southern border. Biden named Kamala Harris as in charge of the border. She has not been to the southern border once as vice president. I would say to the folks in the media, anytime you're standing in front of the president or vice president, the very first question should be, why haven't you gone to the southern border to see the crisis, to see the little boys and little girls being physically abused, sexually abused because of your policy failures? And by the way, the reason they don't go, there's an answer to this, is they know if they go, they'll bring TV cameras. They know if they go, the press will be forced to cover it. Kamala Harris has been to the Canadian border as vice president.